Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome back to part 3 of the Make Your Own Roblox cheat tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about ESP, and I want to apologize that it took me so long to get to this part 3. I've had a lot of personal issues come up lately, and my breaker's been tripping at my new house, so I have moved my PC back to my parents' house temporarily until that issue gets figured out. And it's working over here, so I can finally get to this. Sorry about that. I want to also say that part 2 needs to be re-uploaded and re-edited still. I'm not going to do that right now because it is still sufficient. But yeah, what we're going to be talking about in this video is how to create a basic ESP, and then we're going to go into how to add it into the menu that we made last video. So, coming over here, let's do a quick explanation of what we're going to be doing and what the idea here is. So I'm going to go over to test and start up a 2-player local server real quickly. Let's see, opening the server, and here's our 2 players. And this is a good way to test like aimbot or ESP or things that you would need a real game for. If you don't have an executor, you can do it like this. So coming in here, we are going to be grabbing our players table, and we're going to be making a for loop, which just loops through everything in the table. And sorry, this actually isn't a table, this is a service, but there's a way we can turn all of the players in here into a table. So going over here, under player 2's character, what we're going to be doing is adding a billboard GUI and a text label. And in this text label, we're going to be setting this to always on top, and we're going to be moving it up on the y-axis by 3. Well, that's actually kind of high. Hold on. 2, maybe. And then over here with our text label, we're going to make it the player's name. So this would be player 2. And make that background invisible. And then we can do some more stuff to pretty it up later. But as you can see, because we did that always on top property, if I spawn a part here and then I scale it, I can still see this player through the wall by their name. But yeah, let's go ahead and start working on it and explain how we're going to be doing this. Oh wait, that was the wrong thing. Whoops. Cancel. Okay, over here, let's start by making our billboard GUI and ESP GUI. This should be very basic by the way that I just showed you. If you're advanced enough, you should be able to already do this by yourself. So I'm just going to kind of speed through this part. But the first thing we're going to need is an ESP GUI. And in the future, if you want to add more ESPs, you can also add them onto this, which I'll explain later on. But let's see, ESP GUI equals instance.new billboard GUI. And then we don't need a parent for this because we're going to be setting that in our for loop. So we have our ESP GUI, and we also need our name ESP itself, which is going to be a, text label, if it'll work, text label. And we're going to parent that to the ESP GUI. Now we have our ESP properties, and we need our, we have the instances, we need the properties now. So ESP GUI let's do the name, because we're going to need to reference it in our thing to check if it's there already or not. So we're going to call it ESP GUI dot extents offset. As you saw, that was a 3 value thing, so it's going to be a vector 3, I believe, dot new 0 3 0, or let's do, yeah, 3 is fine. I'll just leave it at 3 for testing. ESP GUI dot what's the other thing that we need? The always on top property. So always on top equals true. And then for our name ESP, we shouldn't need to do a whole lot. Let's just make that background invisible. So background transparency, set that to 1. And then let's set the text color to green. So text color 3 equals color 3 from RGB 0 255 0. And then down here, name ESP dot text color 3, we need to do now the text stroke transparency equals 0. And that's all we should need. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, yeah. We'll set the text itself later on in our for loop, which we're going to do here. So let's make some comments real quick, just saying ESP properties and ESP instances. Sorry, I'm bad on the keyboard right now. And then ESP loop. All right, so here's where we do our for loop, which we've never done before, so I'm going to do my best to explain it as we go. To start off, we need to define a for loop by saying for, and now we need two values. The first one is going to be an integer, or the number in the list of our table. So when we make a table, which looks like this, of course, we have multiple things. The first number is going to be the integer or the number of the table, and the second one is going to be the value, which is how we would call it later on. So if we say I was like 3, then we could say v later on and then change the properties of 3 through v. That's a terrible explanation, and it's a very hard concept to grab. I'm also on a time limit here for this one, unfortunately. But we won't be needing I, since we're going to be looping through all the players in the game except for ourselves, but we can do a check to make sure that it doesn't add it to ourselves anyway. So let's just get rid of I and just do an underscore instead. These two can be anything you want them to be. They're basically just a name like you would do for a variable. So they're not very important. But for underscore v, in pairs is going to be our next statement. And that's a hard one to explain. If you want to fully grasp that, I would suggest looking at documentation. But just know, for now at least, that if you want to do a for loop like this, you need to do in pairs and then put your table. So this is where our table is going to go. And the table that we want is the players in the game. Again, that's a service, not a table. So let's get the service by doing game get service players. Now what we need to do is make it into a table. And luckily, Roblox has a function in it by default that changes all of the players' names and their paths into a table. And that function is called getPlayers. So now we've gotten all the players in the game, and we need to do some code that changes some things with them, or mostly runs some checks and adds things to them, really. But we're going to say do. This is where we're going to run our code. So for underscore v in pairs, get our table, and then we're going to say do, and then let's go ahead and end that. And over here, what we're going to do is start our checks. So the first check is going to be whether the player that we're looking at is ourselves, and we're going to also make sure that their character is there. So if v does not equal, the way we do does not equal is this little squiggly line and then an equals. We don't need to do two equals because we're doing this first statement. So if v does not equal game.players, and then we're going to get our local player. So if the character, which is v, is not the local player, and v.character. So if it's not our local player, and if v.character exists, if the player 1 or player 2 characters does exist, then we're going to move on to our next set of checks. Now the next check that we're going to do is look for the humanoid root part, because that's going to be where we're attaching our ESP. And let's say if v.character, and now we're going to find first child, and we're going to make that child humanoid root part. Then next what we want to do is check and see if there's already an ESP there. And if we don't do this check, then it'll just, each time the loop runs, keep adding ESP, spams the fuck out of your game, and it's going to make it unplayable. It's going to lag it really badly, and we don't want to do that, obviously. So let's do a check to see if the ESP is already there by saying if v.character.humanoid root part, find first child ESP GUI, then we want to continue. but we want to make sure it's not there, so that we add it if it's not there, and if it is there, then we just go back to the beginning of the loop. And we don't need to return, it does that automatically. So if not, find the ESP. Then, now we add our actual ESP. But let's change a property first. Let's go ahead and change the text to the player's name. And the way that we're going to do that is by saying name ESP dot text equals v dot name. And that actually, I just realized that won't work. We have to oh my god, I can't say that word, concatenate it by saying equals, and because if we try to set it to v.name is technically not a string, so we have to get it into a string by concatenating it and getting the actual text from it. And the way that we're going to do that is by putting another set of quotations. Now we need to do 2 periods and 2 periods. If that basic explanation on concatenating wasn't enough, then I would suggest looking into it yourself as well, because it's a very hard thing to explain. But now it's setting it to the text of the character's name instead of the path to their name, basically, if you can grasp that. It's a very hard thing to understand, though, so don't feel bad if you don't get it. ESP GUI. Now we're going to set the adornee, which is a property that is basically it binds the ESP to the character and makes it follow them. If we didn't do this, 2 things could happen. Either it could set the adornee to the part that we're cloning it to automatically, or it could just get stuck in the middle of space where the player was, or just somewhere random, basically. So let's go ahead and set that adornee to v.character.humanoid root part, which is the part that we are attaching it to, obviously. Humanoid, oh my gosh, humanoid root part. And then down here, ESP GUI. Now we're going to clone like that. And we need to set the parent of the clone. So dot parent. This is how you would use the clone function. You would say ESP GUI, and then you would clone it with the clone function, and then you can set the parent immediately after by doing dot parent, and we say equals v dot character dot humanoid, oh my god, humanoid root part, and then we can start ending all of these lines. Now that should be all we have to do that I can think of right now. I'm probably missing something, so let me go test this, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I'm actually pretty impressed with myself. The only thing I forgot to do was set the size of the GUI and the name ESP. So all we have to do for that is make them the same size as the humanoid root part. So we're going to say ESP GUI. Since the parent is the humanoid root part, all we have to do is say dot size equals udim2 dot new. 1, 0, 1, 0, and then we're going to do the same thing down here for the name ESP. There you go. And now when we go ahead and stick it into our game here, let's put a wait there just in case Roblox decides to break. We're just going to wait 1. And when we go ahead and go back into our test server, it should run the script on yourself, and it should clone a ESP to the other player. As you can see, after 1 second, because we had that wait 1 in there, it adds the ESP. And let's make sure, just to be sure, that if I spawn a part here and I scale it up, I can see them through the wall, which I indeed can. And it's pretty much lined up with their actual name, which is nice, especially for games that have those names disabled. But yeah, as you can see, I can see him wherever he is. If he moves around, then the ESP will follow. And the reason the part is not showing up over here is because I added it locally from this game. I would have to add it on the server over here if I wanted it to show up for both of them, but it doesn't matter. Now let's do one more check just to make sure that it loops through every player in the game, and let's do a test with 4 players this time. So now there should be 3 people that it gets added to. And this might be a much harder tutorial to keep up with than the last, so if you need any help, please reach out to me in the comments. I'm always willing to give people help, or even sometimes give lessons if I have enough free time on my hand. But as you can see, it adds ESP to all the players. And now let's talk about two things. Let's talk first about how we can add it, add a team check-in. And then we're going to talk about how to add it to our menu itself. So to add a team check, the first thing that we want to do is go down here, and we're going to say if v dot team does not equal game dot players dot local player dot team, and then we would have to space these out and add another end in there. But what that's doing is saying if the character's team is not equal to our team, the local player's team, then we want to add the ESP to them. And that's only if your team check is on true, which I'm not going to explain how to add a team check, because when I show you how to add it into this menu, then it should explain mostly everything. So let's go ahead and get rid of that line here. And now let's take our code and let's move it over here down to our functions. And we'll go ahead and move the ESP instances up to our instances right here. And we're going to move the properties to our properties. So let's do that real quick. And then I'm just going to leave this as is. But up here in our properties, let's just make it the first thing right here. And now we have our ESP properties in, so give me a second to add a ESP button in, and then I'll show you how and what you're going to do from there. Alright, so I've gone ahead and done two things. I've added the ESP button and the title for the ESP button, and I've also added a ESP thing in the table, true or false value. So now you may be asking, how are we going to actually add this into the button? This is just the basic outline code. As you can see, it's the exact same as the night mode. The only difference is I changed some of the properties and removed the night mode function at the end. So what we're going to do is go down here under the ESP button and just put our function down here so it's easier to see temporarily at least. And we're going to add a check that says if settings table dot ESP, then we're going to go ahead and execute this code. Alright, so looking at my old code, there was one thing I forgot to do, which was make a thing that runs this code every function, or every frame, not every function. But it's the same code that we use down here to toggle our menu. It's just that run service code here. So we're going to go ahead and add that in, and now let's go ahead and give it a test to make sure that every time that we click it, it is going to, or every frame, it is going to check if it is true or not, and then it's going to add our ESP if it is true. Alright, so we're back here now, and if I click the name ESP, as you can see, it gets instantly added because we're checking every frame whether that's true or not. But the problem is, if we turn it off, it stays on. So now the other thing that we need to do is figure out how to remove that ESP when the code isn't running. So we already know that it only is checking if it needs to add the ESP or not if the settings table is enabled. So we say up here, else, if it's not enabled, then we need to go through and destroy it. So we're going to say go through all the players again and basically just copy and paste this, but we're going to be doing a couple things different. So we don't need this check because we already know that it's false, so we can go ahead and remove that. And copy paste is the way to code. Everyone knows that. So we can also remove this check because it doesn't matter if they're the local player or not. So we can just say if v.character, then if v.character find first child humanoid root part, then if v.character.humanoid root part find first child ESP-GUI, then all we need to do is go ahead and destroy it. So we need an end there, we need an end there, and then we can remove this extra line here. So what we're going to say is v.character.humanoid root part.esp-GUI, and then we're just going to do the default destroy function in Roblox. And now it should toggle whenever we go ahead and test. It should toggle when we disable it. Sorry, this has been kind of a weird tutorial. I'm on a very strict time limit. I gotta leave around like 6:15, which kind of sucks. But anyway, let's make sure it works. Go ahead, turn it on. As you can see, it's on. Turn it off, goes away. And we can re-enable it, disable it, re-enable. And that is how you would do your ESP. That is how you would make your ESP in Roblox. Very basic, but at the same time it uses a lot of confusing things. Like, it's not really as many lines as you would think. This is all you need for an ESP technically, but it is a little bit harder to add it into a menu and make sure it enables and disables. There's so much more optimal ways of enabling and disabling this ESP. I'm not going to be going into them. I just want to show you the basics, and as you get better at Lua and as you learn more, you can find more optimal ways of doing it yourself. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully I can get this video out before I have to leave and get it all edited and everything. But part 4 might be a while from now, and I'll see what I'm doing. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for part 4 next, but I'm thinking about aimbot. Aimbot is extremely advanced though, and it uses a lot of camera manipulation and math, so it's very confusing. But yeah, again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.